welcome to everybody. I'm Lorenzo Costa and you are at La Scoscesa farm in Gaiole in Chianti, in the hamlet of Lake in Chianti, which is part of the municipality of Gaiole in Chianti. La Scoscesa farm is a farm that is based in a particular region in Italy, the Chianti region, which is famed for wine producing. And it is a 9-hectare farm, which is entirely covered with terraces, with dry stone retaining walls. And half of the actual landscape of the farm is woodland, based mostly on juniper trees and oak trees. And the other part is an abandoned olive grove, which was abandoned 40 years ago, and that we have started to regenerate and to put in production with this farm. This farm was, we started this farm 5 years ago, and I've done studies in contemporary history. I work in the University of Siena as a technician in the Department of Pharmacy and Biotechnologies. And 5 years ago, I decided to become a farmer. So I started studying how I could design a farm. And I immediately decided to apply permaculture design, which is an ecological way of designing, which can be actually applied not only in a rural setting, on a farm setting, but can be applied in different locations, in different situations. My specific situation was that of designing a farm. And my idea was to use permaculture design and an approach tied to agroecology and regenerative agriculture to design this farm and to put this landscape that is a marginal abandoned landscape in production. So permaculture is an ecological design system that was started 40 years ago in Australia. It comes from permanent and culture that gives the name permaculture. And it is a design system that is based on 3 ethics: people care, earth care, and future care. And on those 3 ethics, as designers, we build the whole systemic vision of the farm, which is designed applying some principles. The design principles are derived from ecological natural principles of design. And on those principles, we have strategies and techniques, which in our specific case are techniques that are tied to agroecology and regenerative agriculture techniques, which is an approach to soil, an approach that we have to the whole system we have on this farm. And the fact that using permaculture design, we worked on the resources that we have on the landscape, the exposition, the slope we have. The farm has 130 meters of difference in elevation from top to bottom. And it is entirely terraced with dry stone retaining walls. So what we started to look at, observing, were the microclimates we had with all the terraces, the different elevations. The slope is southeast facing, so it is favorable for agriculture. But you have to start to work with the resources you have. So what we did was working with the water retention systems and using water as energy that passes on our landscape, on the farm, as something that is a positive resource for the system. The other aspect was that to not think only of the farm as a system by itself, but look at it in the territory we are in. So creating a network with what is surrounding our farm and the resources we can input in the farm that come from outside. Okay, so in our approach to, in our design, applying permaculture in the Scoscesa farm, actually starting from one of the ethics, which is earth care, our first interest was on regenerating the soil on which we are growing, on which we are growing fruit trees, berries, or vegetables for the vegetable gardens. So our approach on the soil was starting from the fact that the soil is a living part of the whole system. And so our approach was to try to understand how to enhance the fertility of the soil. Here we have a soil that has a pH of 8.1. We had a very low organic matter, and the calcium, active calcium in the soil is very high. So the nutrients for the plants are not completely available, because calcium stops the possibility of the plants to, let's say, sort of take all the nutrients up. So our approach to soil was to start working with how can we enhance the fertility. And our first thing was to work with rameal wood chips, with what is called even BRF, which is the chips that you see here. These are all from olive cuttings, olive pruning, that were made now during the harvest of olives. These olive prunings come from two neighboring farms that are organic certified farms. They take all their prunings to us, or we go and collect them, and we use a wood chipper and we chip all these wood chips, and we inoculate these wood chips with microorganisms that are based on the microorganisms, bacteria and fungi we have on our soil in this farm. This approach is a whole vision we have, a systemic vision we have on soil fertility, and it is based primarily on a specific technique, which is KNF, which is Korean natural farming, and it was started 40 years ago by Master Cho in Korea. It is substantially it is applying what is the traditional Japanese, Chinese and Korean approach to soil, to agriculture. So what we do is we are applying it's 2 years, we are applying KNF here on our farm. And we decided to specifically use only one approach to soil fertility. Because often what happens in farms is we maybe apply 1 year one approach, another year another approach, or we mix different techniques. Instead, we wanted to actually analyze the results we had and we will have from KNF. So we started applying KNF. Now KNF is an approach to soil fertility, and one of the first preparations we started doing was that of IMO, which is indigenous microorganisms. And you start from capturing indigenous microorganisms from the leaf litter you have in the woodland. We capture the microorganisms with this, which is just a ravioli cooker, Chinese ravioli cooker made out of bamboo. You put rice inside, half-boiled rice. You leave it for 1 week in the leaf litter you have in the woodland, and the microorganisms, bacteria and fungi will completely inoculate all the rice. After 1 week, this is IMO1, this is the first phase of a 4-phase production of indigenous microorganisms. After a week, you collect the rice and you mix it with sugar, brown sugar, integral brown sugar, and you put the same weight of rice with the same weight of sugar, and in fact you take the microorganisms and the bacteria and the fungi to go into stasis, because they live off sugar. So you give them so much sugar that they sort of stop, they go into stasis, and this IMO2 is a preparation that is ready to use for even up to 1 year. You can use it as a foliar leaf treatment, a foliar treatment. You use it, you put it in water, so it becomes a liquid foliar treatment. Otherwise, you put it always with water. You inoculate it onto rice, the husks of the rice or of wheat. And we have close by, we have a mill that gives us all the waste, that is all the hulls from the wheat they mill. So we use that, we do 200, 300 kilo batches of IMO3. Once that is ready, the whole batch of husks is inoculated with microorganisms. We move on to IMO4, which is this preparation, which is made putting all the husks you have with the same volume of soil from your farm, from your land, and the microorganisms inoculate the whole soil you are doing to use for IMO4. You can see this sort of little white things you see on the soil, and these are all microorganisms. It becomes all fluffy, and you use this, you powder it on top of the beds or under the fruit trees you have, and this inoculates your soil and activates the soil fertility, the living part of the soil, which is the rhizosphere. And we work on permanent beds in the vegetable gardens, so we don't turn around the whole soil horizons. We work on the permanent beds in the vegetable gardens, and we have all the part that where we work with berries and trees that are treated with these microorganisms, which can be the ramial wood chips or can be the IMO. And so we are trying to actually enhance soil fertility. And the interesting thing is we are doing it with a low cost technique, which is based entirely on indigenous microorganisms, bacteria and fungi. So you're not buying an input, you're not taking inputs from outside of your farm, but you are working with what you have actually on farm. Okay, so if we look at our approach, applying permaculture design, the second ethic, people care, is directly tied to the fact that we produce food. We produce vegetables, berries, we will have fruit trees that we planted 2 years ago. And it is intimately tied to the people care, because on this territory in Gaiole in Chianti, we are the only farm that is producing food. And so our idea was that to give the possibility to, for the community to have access to nutrient-dense food, to good food, organically produced food. And this is tied to the approach we have to soil, to earth care. And it is something that was interesting for me to do when I started to design the farm, because people care here, it is interesting. Gaiole in Chianti has a very vibrant and live community, which is directly tied to the history of this landscape, of this territory. And it is directly tied to the fact that here we had a sharecropping. We had a community that was highly connected. Today we still have this community, and our idea was that to put the farm inside of this community, tie it to this community, grow inside the community, and connect all our productions. If I think about historically, once when they were growing wheat here in Gaiole in Chianti, up to 100 years ago, it was something that would gather people together. It was part of a sort of feast, you know, and people would come together. And my idea is that one day producing wheat here in Gaiole in Chianti will become again a thing that's something that will create community, that will put people together again around food production. So the actual approach here is that of building community around a farm, which is missing in this landscape, which is missing in this territory. And it is something that I believe is very important. When we even started to design the farm 4 years ago, we started looking at the fact that no one produces food on this territory. We have around 50 restaurants, and we have people that live here. We have tourists. So we started noticing there was, even if we speak about the investment we made, you know, there was a market you could open up as a farm on this territory. And the interesting thing is that we believe that diversifying even the productions you have on a farm is very important. It actually came out clearly during the COVID pandemic this year that the fact that you hardly only produce wine in the Gaiole in Chianti, in the Chianti area, is on one side is highly interesting as what you can get as a market. But it's a very fragile market, because with the pandemic, this market actually just closed down because you can't export anymore your produce. The idea on the Scoscesa farm was to diversify the productions and sell them locally. We sell locally nutrient-dense food, and the idea is tied to the fact that the markets we have to build are local markets, tied to the fact that communities have to eat. People have to have access to good food, and they have to have the possibility to eat. And on the farm side, if we look at the investment side, which is important, you have to diversify your productions. So let's say if 1 year olives, it will be a bad year for olives, I won't produce so much oil, I have other productions. We produce saffron, we produce legumes, chickpeas and lentils. We have started producing wheat. Now it's only on an experimental level. We produce vegetables. We do berries, gooseberries, we do raspberries. We have fruit trees that we transplanted 2 years ago. So we are starting to diversify. We do wild asparagus and commercial asparagus. So we are diversifying our productions. Because if you remember, as I said before, permaculture design is about designing sustainable, resilient, efficient and stable systems. And resilience means that if one of my markets close, I have the possibility to keep on existing as a farm, to be profitable, because I have other productions. I am resilient, I'm more stable, and I have the major thing is that I sell and I produce and then I sell locally. So my community is directly tied to my farm, and you can build a network on that. So this is one of the aspects that is interesting, because I think it's directly related to agroecology and regenerative agriculture. Because we don't only regenerate agriculture, we regenerate even communities with these approaches that are ecosystemic, that look at the ecosystem of which we are part, intimately tied to the ecosystem. So basing a farm on the landscape, on the territory you're on, and building on that is central to this approach. Okay, so speaking of the approach we have on our permanent beds in the vegetable gardens, we can see here, this plot here, we had green beans that were growing here. We cut the plants, we put the green beans to decompose on the beds directly. We put on top all this mulch that is from the wheat we harvested this year on the farm. And we inoculated the whole beds with the IMO4 that I showed you before. And you probably can't see that, but we have bacteria here that is decomposing the organic matter, and that is inoculating the soil. So this is the approach, this is how we tie our approach on soil regeneration, applying KNF, Korean natural farming, to the beds. And this is ready for next spring when we will seed or transplant plants on this plot. We will have had microorganisms, bacteria, fungi that have worked whole winter under this mulch, and they will be ready in spring. They will stay in the soil, and this is how we apply our regeneration approach on vegetable gardens. Okay, so as I said before, one of the approaches we had in applying permaculture design to the farm was that of how do we manage a resource like rainwater? And we are on a slope. We have 130 meters of difference in elevation. So on a slope, the risk of having high erosion is evident. You can actually see it. When we first bought this land, there was a lot of erosive events. So we decided immediately to manage rainwater. And what we did was we decided to dig these small water retention basins that are basins that function under a permaculture design approach, where every element has to at least have 3 functions. The first function is to eliminate erosion. So we are managing water, moving it to these water retention basins so it doesn't create erosive flow on the slope that we have on the farm. The second thing is to infiltrate it into the soil. So we are elevating the water table, and we are re-infiltrating water into the soil where it is needed, where we have trees, where we have fruit trees, where we have berries. And the third thing is to create some wetland areas that can function for insects, for birds, for small fauna, and for small animals. So we have 16 different water retention basins on the whole part of the farm where we are now. And what is the idea is that we collect all the water that passes on the land, and we are at halfway down a hill. My neighbor has a 4-hectare olive grove on top of us, so all the water comes down from his olive grove. When it enters our farm, it is immediately managed, so it is diverted to these different basins, water retention basins, and this becomes central. And it becomes central because precipitation, the pattern we have of rainfall, is changing. So we have major events, maybe in certain periods of the year where a lot of water comes down, and having these water retention basins which are not lined, so we don't hold water, we infiltrate it. So actually, the moment they start filling up of water, they even start infiltrating. So we have never had an event where the water goes out of the overflow we have in every basin, which then sends the overflow to another basin. So we always have this system where with the infiltration we can keep the levels under check. And it is essential not only on a farm level. We should start to think about rainwater management, rainwater harvesting, even on a territorial level. If we thought about rainwater management on the territory of Gaiole in Chianti or sub-regional areas, it would be essential because what we have today, as I said, rainwater pattern, rainfall pattern is changing, but we channel water and we take it away. The faster it gets to the sea, the better we are. The truth is we have to hold water high up in our landscapes to rehydrate landscapes, because the changing climate we have makes it central to use water, to see water as a resource and not see rainwater as a risk that we can have. We do have certainly in Italy and in Tuscany, and especially in Gaiole and Chianti, for the sort of landscape we have an hydrological risk, which is clear, evident. But I think what the problem is today that actually is we don't manage rainwater. That's why rainwater is a risk that we have today. We could actually, if we started thinking about a territorial system of management of rainwater, we could transform that risk into a resource. And that would be central on a territorial level, but it is starting from the single farm that we have to start thinking about these systems. Okay, always speaking in viewing it as the system we have designed on the farm. Here we see all the different terraces that go down from in our farm, where we are growing a mixed system, which is an agroforestry system where you have the olive trees that were pre-existing to our farm. And then we started transplanting fruit trees on the line where the olive trees are. And you can see the trees that are without leaves now because it's autumn. And on the terrace we are growing, in this case you can see on the first terrace here, we are growing wheat. And we have cover crops that go down where we will put chickpeas and lentils in February and March. And we go down to other vegetable beds that we have down at the bottom. Here we are seeing a system that is based on 29 terraces where we grow different crops. And the idea is that of applying a historical approach, but in 2020. So if you are from Tuscany, if you know how sharecropping was organized, we are just applying the system, which is a historical system of cultura promiscua, which in English I could translate as polycultures. It has a polycultural approach to growing food on the same portion of land. We have trees that occupy one layer, which is vertical, and we have some certain crops that occupy a horizontal layer, which is on the terrace. And if you wanted to actually transform and enhance the complexity of the system, the second level would be to even have animals that graze, that do rotational grazing on the terraces. So the system would be complete. This is an approach that is very interesting because it gives the farmer and it gives the farm the possibility to actually produce on the same piece of land, have different productions and have different productions during the year and different productions that are perennial on the same piece of land. And it's easily defined here because you have the terraces and you had the olive grove that was pre-existing. So it was obvious that we could fill in the gaps. This is an old olive grove, so the trees are even at 10, 12 meters from one another. So we just filled in the gaps with fruit trees. And then you could even get to more complexity once the fruit trees have grown. You could put berries underneath. Another artichokes is another perennial that is usually grown in the middle of an olive grove. So the idea is we can continue to make the system become more complex and have different perennials we can grow on this agroforestal system that is based on the terraces.